It was supposed to be a routine night shift. Officer Mark Reynolds and his K9 partner, Thor, had been patrolling the quiet streets of a small town for years. The bond between them was more than that of a handler and his dog. Thor was Mark's best friend, his protector, and his unwavering companion. That night, as the cool breeze swept through the dimly lit streets, a call came through the radio. A suspected armed robbery in progress. Mark gripped the steering wheel, glancing at Thor, who was already alert, ears perked, sensing the tension in the air. "Mark, ready for this, buddy?" Thor let out a low, eager growl. He was always ready. They arrived at the scene within minutes. The convenience store's lights flickered, the front door slightly ajar. Mark stepped out of the squad car cautiously, signaling for Thor to stay close. His hand hovered over his holster as he pushed the door open, scanning the aisles. That's when he heard it. A rustling noise behind the counter, followed by the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. Before Mark could react, a masked man leapt out, aiming a pistol straight at him. Bang! The deafening gunshot echoed through the store. Pain seared through Mark's chest as he stumbled backward, collapsing onto the cold tile floor. He gasped for air, struggling to keep his vision from fading. Thor sprang into action. With a fierce snarl, the loyal K9 launched himself at the gunman, knocking the weapon from his hands before he could fire another shot. The masked man screamed, trying to shake the dog off, but Thor's powerful jaws clamped down on his arm. Mark, fighting to stay conscious, watched as Thor dragged the assailant down, keeping him pinned. The store clerk, hiding behind the register, fumbled to call 911. Mark's breathing grew shallow. His vision blurred. He could hear Thor growling, refusing to let the attacker go. But Mark knew he was running out of time. Mark, Thor. At the sound of his name, Thor released the suspect, who was already too wounded to fight back, and rushed to his handler's side. His large, warm body pressed against Mark's, his wet nose nudging his face. Sirens blared in the distance. The backup was finally arriving. Thor whined and licked Mark's face desperately, as if trying to keep him awake. His dark eyes were filled with something Mark had never seen before. Fear. "Mark, hang in there, buddy." The next few moments were a blur. Paramedics stormed in, officers cuffed the suspect, and Thor was reluctantly pulled away as Mark was loaded onto a stretcher. Thor refused to leave his handler's side. It took 2 officers to hold him back as Mark was taken into the ambulance. Days passed. Mark drifted in and out of consciousness in the hospital. The bullet had punctured his lung, but the doctors said he was lucky. It had missed his heart by inches. But Mark knew luck had nothing to do with it. If it weren't for Thor, he would have never made it out of that store alive. When he finally opened his eyes for good, the first thing he saw was a pair of familiar brown eyes staring back at him. Thor, the loyal K9, had been allowed to visit, and the moment he saw Mark awake, his tail wagged furiously. He leaped onto the bed, careful not to hurt his handler, and licked his face over and over. "Mark, missed you too, buddy." The hospital room was filled with officers, reporters, and even the police chief, all eager to hear the story of how Thor had saved his partner's life. "Officer, he wouldn't leave the hospital doors. We had to let him in before he broke the door down." Mark ruffled Thor's fur, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Mark, you saved my life." The chief stepped forward and placed a medal around Thor's neck. "Chief, for bravery beyond words, you're a hero, Thor." The room erupted in applause. But Thor didn't care about any of it. He just curled up beside Mark, finally at peace, knowing his best friend was safe. As the days went by, Mark recovered, and when he was finally discharged, Thor never left his side. Their bond was now stronger than ever, a bond forged not just in loyalty, but in a love that transcended words. And from that day on, every time Mark looked into Thor's eyes, he saw more than just a partner. He saw his guardian angel.